lies beneath the briny waves of the vast, bottomless ocean.
This was about 10 years ago now, in early 2014. I'm a merchant mariner, and at the time I was working on an American-flagged car carrier in the engineering department as an oiler. My whole life growing up, I've had some rather strange things happen, seen some strange things, felt some things, etc. But this is the first time I've had it happen on a ship I was working on. I was on the midnight to noon watch with the third engineer. When I was in the middle of my readings one evening, I happened to notice an orange blur in my peripheral vision on the deck below, which was the lowest deck in the ER. I turned my head and caught just the glimpse of orange overalls walking down the shaft. This wasn't the engineer or anyone else in engineering, as we didn't wear coveralls. Our work outfit consisted of cargo/mechanic pants and whatever shirt you owned. The deck guys, however, did wear orange, so I finished up my reading and walked down to the lower level to find him. I thought maybe it could have been the AB on night watch, but they didn't make rounds in engineering spaces. But whatever. So I go down there, and no one's there. Probably just tired, I thought, and finished my rounds. After finishing up, I turned in the sheet to the third in the control room, then stepped back out to go start on a project when I saw the door to the tool room/machine shop flap closed. Again, I thought it was probably just a decky down here to steal a tool or something. So of course I go to the shop, and as I entered the shop, the door to the storage room was just closing. I continue to follow, but there's no one in the storage room, and the only other way out would be through steering and up onto the main cargo deck. I continued into steering, gave a quick glance around, and again, I found nothing. On my way back out, I glanced into the hydraulics room when I finally saw him. He was facing away from me, looking at a panel, and I almost just walked past. I caught myself mid-step and shouted over the sound of the steering pumps to get his attention. The man jumped and was turning around when the ship lost power. Losing power was nothing new. This ship has had a faulty shaft generator for a while. It was pretty standard. I didn't think anything of it until I got my flashlight out of my pocket, and the man was gone, like he was never there. I looked around, but nothing. I was starting to get a little nervous and jumpy at that point, but right before panic could set in, the diesel generators kicked in and lights were restored. I returned to the control room to ask the third if a decky had left the engine room through there. He said no. Cut to a few days later, I was talking with the boatswain's mate in the deck locker when I noticed a picture hanging almost as if it were a memorial. I asked him about it. The boatswain said it had been there for a while. The ship used to be Swedish flagged, and they had a death aboard back then, before it became US flagged. I sort of went quiet, then I told him what I saw a few days ago, and he just goes, "Oh yeah, we catch glimpses of him roaming around the cargo deck sometimes too." I didn't have anything else happen that trip, and we even got the shaft generator fixed in the next port. But still, it was sort of wild having that happen in the last place I'd ever expect.
The ocean used to be my favorite place until last summer when I almost drowned. Growing up, my parents would take my brother and I to a small reef where we would swim and snorkel all day. Now that I'm an adult, I occasionally take friends out to do the same thing, only with the addition of alcohol. The boat ride is only 40 minutes from shore, and we've never seen a shark out there. We rarely even saw other people. On this particular day, it was just me and my girlfriend, and this was already pretty routine for us. As usual, we were snorkeling, screwing around, when she noticed a baby sea turtle with a fishing line trailing behind it. This is a sadly common occurrence, and we couldn't just leave it that way. Sometimes they get tangled in a net, or just get so wrapped up that you have to cut through thick layers, so I always keep a good knife on me while in the water. The turtle was making its way to the deeper parts of the reef, so I took a deep breath and hurried after it while my girlfriend waited at the surface. I caught the little guy just as he tried to crawl into a dark crevice near the sea floor. Luckily, the fishing line was easy to remove, and I sent him on his way without needing to go up for air. But I was at my limit. I stepped onto the large rock and pushed off to speed my ascent. As I began to slow, I glanced down just in time to see a massive brown tentacle shoot out of the reef wall and wrap around my leg. It looked like the reef itself had come to life. The tentacle was double the thickness of my thigh, and in a split second, it wrapped my leg from ankle to knee. It took all of my self-restraint not to scream out what precious oxygen I had left. That's when I noticed a huge section of the reef wall moving, and I saw its eyes open. It was like a giant, monster octopus, perfectly camouflaged to match its surroundings. I could have stared at that spot all day and never noticed anything unusual if it hadn't grabbed me. My leg was completely numb. My lungs were on fire. I knew that I would lose any slim chance of survival if I started choking, so I took my knife and I began desperately stabbing at the tentacle. Black ink instantly spread through the water, and I heard a shrill scream that, to this day, I still can't be sure if it belonged to this giant octopus or my girlfriend. It was about that time that she saw the black ink spreading from the surface and came to see what was happening. I didn't see her. I only felt a sharp tug on the back of my shirt as she was pulling me to the surface. We didn't stick around to look for the octopus. We just hurried onto the boat and got away from that place. Only after we gained some distance did I stop to explain what happened and look at my leg. I stabbed myself twice and had to get over 30 stitches afterwards. But aside from that and a touch of PTSD, I was fine. Obviously, we've never gone back and don't intend to, but I just have to know. Has anyone else seen an octopus that size? Was it even an octopus? Could it have been anything else?
This happened to my grandfather, and given that he's older than dirt, I'm typing it up for him as he tells it. Around January of 1988. Anyways, I'll tell you the story that you want to hear, just so we can get on with fishing. Just don't put my name in here, you hear? I, of course, agreed to these terms, despite the fact that I hate fishing. I figure you folk might enjoy the night that emotionally paralyzed my great-grandfather for the majority of his adult life. I went to work for a company called MUSC, Maritime and Underwater Security Consultants. US-based, but most of her operations were over there in Indonesia. Basically, big freight companies wanted protection from local pirates. However, many simply weren't willing to pay the price and would choose to rely on the Navy. Which, son, let me tell you, after almost 16 years in the Navy, I learned a big thing. It's slow as hell. From South Korea to the Philippines, into Indonesia and then onto Australia before making the journey home, the boys and I, 16 security personnel total, were stuck with a crew of about 50 Norwegians, and really the captain was the only one who knew a lick of decent English. Anyways, we were passing through the Makassar Strait at around 0130, dark as hell. The ocean was quiet. We'd advised the captain that sailing through this particular stretch of sea at night would increase our fee a shit ton. It was, honestly, the dumbest idea to ever come out of that sucker's mouth. There had been 3 attacks on different merchant vessels the night prior. Nonetheless, in this man's infinite wisdom and wallet, he directed the crew to steam through. So, us, educated Yankee folk, went to the upper decks and got ready for what was destined to be one hell of a night. Assault rifles, Kevlar, light machine guns, fire hoses, the whole kaboom. Full 360 security too. Most of the boys I was with were prior Navy, with some, even if limited, combat experience. So we were pretty confident that we'd be able to handle some pirates armed with AKs. For the first hour and a half, everything was quiet. But it's that Q word that always lands people in trouble. Come up on the second hour, we received a distress call from another vessel, about a mile away from us. The contract with this particular employer included terms that we had to render aid to other vessels in need for a fee adjustment. The captain directed our CEO to send a few boys, via RHIB, over to this other vessel. So the course was adjusted. We got within 200 yards of this other ship, and the RHIB was being loaded up. Guess who got to go over? Myself and 5 others. To beat it all, this other freighter wasn't responding to hails or light signals. We were going in dark. We load up and cross the eerily dark and choppy arse sea, shoot boarding grapples, and climb up. Now, son, you know how I feel about the next part, so I'm going to save some of the details. We cleared the bridge. Nobody was there. We cleared the crew quarters. Nobody was there. We cleared the lower decks. Nobody was there. Eventually, we got to the engine compartments. We saw death. About 10 or 15 men had been cut up, shot, absolutely torn to bits, as if they'd been thrown into a blender. Limbs and feces laid about the room. It was absolutely disgusting. Turns out we'd stumbled across a kidnapping gone wrong. Some of the crew had fought back, so the local pirates dealt with them, took the remainder of the crew for ransom. Funny enough, our CO told us later that MUSC was the K&R company that retrieved them. So Grandpa has dementia, but this is one story that he's told consistently for the better part of his life. So, Mr. Pirate Folk, assuming you're all dead now, or at least, I hope you are, let's not mate.
My grandpa spent his life on fishing boats in the North Sea, and he passed down a lot of stories before his stroke in 2016. Most of them involved giant waves, sinking ships, or piracy, but there was one instance he only spoke of a few times. If you aren't familiar with the North Sea, it's among the most dangerous bodies of water in the world. Grandpa worked on one of the larger boats, but even the biggest get tossed around like toys. Severe storms appear suddenly and unpredictably. The waves were so violent that the men were thrown about the ship without warning. Broken bones and concussions were just routine hazards of the job. Of course, that was nothing compared to falling overboard. That's why any man walking on the deck was tethered to a safety line. The day in question was one of the rare brighter days, but those came with their own dangers. Pirates were far more active on those occasions. Grandpa was one of the men posted to keep watch, while the others brought in the nets. These giant nets were lifted with a crane and capable of supporting more than 1,000 pounds, so we're talking durable stuff here. But this time, it only rose a few feet before coming to a grinding halt. Grandpa had a better view from his position, but even he could only see the line disappearing beneath the surface. The crane was under too much strain and quickly switched off. but the awful grinding noise didn't stop. Next, the line suddenly went slack. The net was rising again, but only for a second. It then went tight with great force and seemed to be pulled out to sea. The ship was dragged behind it for a short distance before the line fell slack again. While most of the crew were distracted with bringing in the net, my grandpa and 2 others were still watching the water. They saw a giant ripple appear. It was more than 3 times the length of the boat as something began rising to the surface. Grandpa thought that he was about to see some kind of military submarine, but instead, it was a fishtail half the size of a blue whale. Not that you typically see blue whales in the North Sea, but it's supposed to be the largest creature in the world. Yet here was something that had an equally as large of a tail, possibly bigger. Only the finned part emerged, and it quickly disappeared again with a hard slap that sent a dangerous wave crashing into the side of the ship. You never want a wave to hit you from the side. They're lucky it didn't take them down, but it did knock Grandpa from his post. If not for the safety line, I would have probably never been born. When order was finally restored, the empty net was pulled back onto the boat. Something had ripped it apart. The ends hadn't been cut or chewed through. They had been pulled apart by brute force. Men who spend their lives at sea tend to be a superstitious bunch, and these guys were no different. By the time they learned what Grandpa and the other 2 witnessed, they were all ready to sail back to port, even though they had 3 weeks left on the hitch. I guess a lot of people would find a new profession, but there weren't a lot of job opportunities in my family's area, so my grandfather spent another 30 years at sea before finally retiring. It was a common lifestyle where they were from. My dad moved to the U.S. for college, where he met my mother, and we've been in Illinois ever since. I don't put much stock into ghosts or monsters, but we don't know what the hell might be out there in the oceans. I don't play when it comes to that stuff.
Background. I work in the offshore oil and gas industry, oil field for short, and the work that my crew and I do often has us working with our equipment set up on board ships called offshore supply vessels / boats, owned by another company. Also, I live and work in Asia. We normally have a crew of 15 to 20 people on the site at any given time, and we don't have specific shifts like day or night. We just work whenever the requirement arises or the client requests, day or night, and in most cases this means we'll be working 24 to 36 hours straight. The story. This one time, the client engaged our company to charter a supply boat and set up our equipment on board to do a job at an offshore drilling rig. Our equipment is huge, 800 horsepower, 20 times 8 feet large diesel-driven units each, and pretty much occupied the whole deck of the boat. Things started up normally. We set up the equipment, took a week's hard work, sailed out of port, got to the drilling rig on schedule. There was some other operational stuff going on, so we waited on standby near the rig for a couple of weeks, floating about and killing time. This is where the fun starts. I mentioned earlier we had about 15 guys on my crew, and there were another 20 guys who made up the boat's crew. Plus the boat isn't that huge, so there's always another human being probably within shouting distance. It started the night we got on location. At breakfast, a couple of my guys were sitting around all zombified and exhausted. They said they had a bad bout of sleep paralysis. Now this can happen occasionally, especially, or should I say as a result of, really hard physical exertion for prolonged periods. So the moment you collapse and have a good deep rest, your body can, in fact, experience what seems to be sleep paralysis. No biggie, since we'd spent a whole week, day and night, rigging up heavy equipment and piping. We shrugged it off and went back to sitting around shooting the breeze. After all, we had a couple of weeks of nothing to do on standby. So, with plenty of rest, it wouldn't happen again. We were wrong. The next night, a few other guys got it. Then the following night, a few other guys experienced it too. And every single night, random guys experienced it. There was no pattern. There was no exception. Eventually, everyone had experienced it. Some reported being able to open their eyes and seeing a dark figure pressing down on them in their bunk beds. A couple of more religious ones tried reciting prayers during the episodes, only to have the choking, pressing feeling intensify. Morale was taking a beating. Isolated cases in the past we could laugh off, since there was a reasonable explanation and correlation to the physical work we did. This time, something was very wrong. The whole crew was getting it, and we literally had zero physical work at all. Still, we gave each other what moral support we could to get through the days and nights. And in the mornings, we knew. The tired, drawn expressions, the sunken eyes, the dark circles. We knew who it had come for the previous night. That's not all. If you've worked offshore, you'll know sometimes standby time is the hardest, because you quickly run out of ideas to pass the time. So we got busy, found things to do, started running through the preventative maintenance and startup checks on our equipment, running the units, so the moment we got the green light from the client, we would be ready to go at full throttle. It came at us there too. Strange sounds on deck, amongst the equipment. I was on deck one evening after dinner, with 5 other guys working on one of the diesel engines. Suddenly a huge metallic boom rang out from the aft deck. It sounded like someone took a 10-pound sledgehammer and slammed it into one of the metal bulkheads. I got up to go to check it out, thinking it might have been a loose lube oil drum or one of the units not being shimmed properly. The supervisor grabbed my arm and said, "Not now, tomorrow, in daylight." I was about to protest, but seeing the look in his eyes, I backed down. In the morning, me and the other guys went to check the aft deck. Nothing. Equipment skids were shimmed tight. Everything secured tight as it should be. And the previous night, there was no one at the aft deck area. But every night from then on, the same boom, the same place, without fail. Another thing, the vessel's crew refused flat out to say anything when we asked about these things. Sure, they were friendly and great guys to work with, but when this topic came up, they simply clammed up tight. And weirdly enough, they also absolutely refused to ever come out on deck after nightfall. Daytime was fine. They would help with any request at all, but after dark, nope. Want a spare part from the deck store during the day? Fill out forms, wait outside while the bosun goes and gets it for you.
Nobody goes inside my store.
After dark, it's a free-for-all. The deck crew, not even a fussy bosun, would come out on deck.
Go ahead and take what you need yourselves. Just fill in the logbook.
The final straw came once it was time to finally get to work. For context, we had an electrician who was a white American, Jack. Awesome guy, chill AF. Skeptical when it comes to weird happenings. He was the one guy on the crew who could laugh off everything that happened and said we were imagining things. So in a way, he helped us keep our sanity. Important for later. The job starts. The big diesel units are running at full throttle. Everyone is giving it their all, and we're all done in about 24 hours straight. Client is happy. Time to sail home. Crew shuts down the equipment, pats each other on the back and heads to the locker room. It's about 2 a.m. at this point. Wait, where's Jack? Jack was curled up in a ball in the locker room, in a tiny gap between the lockers and the wall. A mound of cigarette butts on the floor at his feet, rocking back and forth, chain smoking furiously. He doesn't chain smoke. Pale, shaking, eyes wild and muttering, over and over again.
WTF, man. WTF did I just see? WTF was that thing?
We heard what happened from our mechanic. He was with Jack on the aft deck, near the railing, when they both saw a white, man-sized bundle fall from the drilling rig and into the sea with a loud, audible splash. It's a 30-meter drop from the rig floor to the sea level. Hang on. These guys are standing right behind the diesel engines, 140 decibels loud, with earmuffs on, and they heard a splash? Jack was really excited, thinking it might be a man overboard, wanting to throw him a life ring and jump in to save him. When the mechanic grabbed him, pulled him back from where he was about to climb over the railing, and dragged him backwards. Jack started to argue when they saw something moving in the water. For context, it's dark, midnight. We're out in the open sea. The sea is choppy. If anyone fell into the sea in these conditions, good luck to you. This thing they saw, it was submerged and coming towards the boat, making a B wave as it came. Jack continued arguing, as if in a trance, that it was a man overboard. He needed to rescue the person. Started climbing the rail again. The mechanic slaps him and says, "Jack, whatever that is, it's not human. We're going. Now." Next thing we know, we found Jack huddled in the locker room, out of his damned mind. Couldn't even muster a coherent sentence. Took him a couple of days to regain his composure after that incident. Thankfully, the journey back to port was short, 20 hours sailing time. We were all too motivated to disassemble all the equipment as soon as we reached the shore and get the hell off that boat in record time. Thanks for sticking with me. If you've managed to listen to all this, it's a long, long story, but it was one of the scariest and weirdest experiences I've had in my whole career.
My favorite things to do have always been swimming and exploring, so it's no wonder that I became obsessed with scuba diving and caving. I was 12 when my dad started taking me to do these things, but I didn't go into my first underwater cave until I was 18. After that, I went to as many as I could, as often as I could go. I had no problem exploring the same one over and over. There are some close to where I grew up, and I know them as well as my own home. I'm 36 now, and in all those years, I've never had any close calls or seen anything unusual until my trip to Hawaii. You can see many of their underwater caves on Google, but you won't find the one that I'm talking about. And I'd rather not say exactly where it is, so don't ask. I don't want to be responsible for someone else going down there when I barely made it out. A few days into my trip, I met some locals who told me about a spot that I wouldn't find on the maps. They were planning to go that weekend, were kind enough to invite me to go along. Unfortunately, I was too excited to wait. They warned me not to go alone, but I knew I could find it based on their description. I only intended to explore the entrance. I was never planning to take any risks. I even left most of my equipment behind so I wouldn't be tempted. But this cave was unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not uncommon to find air pockets in these types of places. But that's usually what they are, pockets. Smaller spaces where the water doesn't reach the cave's roof. If you're lucky, there will be a ledge or somewhere to rest without having to use your oxygen supply. But, barring a few exceptions, that's about it. This cave was the mother of all exceptions. I swam to the other end and found that what I thought would be a good resting ledge, but it wasn't. Once I got out of the water, I saw the ledge actually went further than my flashlight could reach. I kept walking, thinking each step would suddenly reveal the end, but it never came. I don't know how long it actually took, but I walked much further than intended. When I finally reached the other side, there was no wall, just more water. I immediately wanted to jump in and keep exploring, but I suddenly got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The coldest chills of my life spread through my body. I've had friends get creeped out like that sometimes. It just never happened to me. But whatever this was, I could feel it in my bones. I carefully surveyed my surroundings while trying to calm down. That's when I noticed another ledge across the water. After a short debate with my better judgment, I decided it was safe enough to swim across and continue exploring the other side. That's when I heard footsteps. My stomach traded places with my heart. It sounded like something very large was dragging its feet and getting closer. But when I shined my light in that direction, the sound stopped. That's when the real fear hit me. If something else was down there, trying to sneak up on me, they only had bad intentions. Knowing I had to leave quickly, I kept my light trained on the opposite ledge in hopes of gaining a little extra distance as I backed away, and a huge pair of red eyes appeared. They were only visible for a brief second before fading back into the darkness, but they definitely weren't human. Even if they hadn't been red and glowing, no one has eyes that big or that far apart. Whatever they belonged to was massive, and I didn't want to meet it. Eventually, my light fell short of the opposite ledge, and a loud splash came immediately after. That thing had jumped into the water to continue its pursuit, and I panicked. I turned and began running as a deafening roar erupted behind me. It made no other sound as it swam across, but it arrived at the other side faster than any human could have. Next, I heard its claws tearing into the rock wall as it climbed onto the ledge, and I fully believed I was going to die there. As the sound of its pursuing footsteps grew closer with each second, I was tempted to turn and face the beast before it killed me. If I was going to die, I deserved to know what my killer looked like, but I was too afraid. Another low growl echoed the cave. Tears filled my vision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the end just ahead, and somehow I'd made it. I barely had enough self-control to enter the water properly, but I'd been through too much to let stupid mistakes kill me now. I swam like a madman, fully expecting a large splash to follow right behind me, but it never came. After a short distance, I stopped with the realization that I would spend the rest of my life wondering if what I experienced was real or some kind of break from reality. So I resurfaced once more, without the flashlight. Everything was pitch black, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. All except for two glowing red orbs in the distance. I couldn't make out anything else, not even the shape of the owner's head. They were completely still, until they suddenly rose several feet higher, like how a snake will stand straight up. It's hard to guess the height even at that angle, but at the very least, it was much taller than a human. Needless to say, it was a while before I went into another cave, and it certainly wasn't that one.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added in the new year. Also, I will be adding new designs to the merch store, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.